Hello everyone, welcome to our video. This is our final exam presentation of Pragmatic. This is a group project and the title of our presentation is Reason for Flouting Maxim in Talk Show. And in this presentation, we're going to explain how conversational maxim are floated in natural conversation, especially in a talk show setting. So, first, let me explain a bit about the background. Okay, communication is something we'll need in daily life. To avoid misunderstanding, both the speaker and the hearer must make their conversational clear and understandable. Okay, in 1975, a linguist named Grace introduced the concept of cooperative principle and conversational maxim as a part of Pragmatic. This maxim help us communicate in a way that is effective, informative, and logical. But in real life situation, people don't always follow these rules. Sometimes they break them either consciously or unconsciously. This is what we call floating a maxim. When what happens, the listener need to look at the context to really understand what the speaker means. Floating usually happens in unscripted, spontaneous conversation, like in a talk show. That's why in this study, we analyzed the floating of Maxim in the Ellen show, specifically in the episode, the title episode is Will Smith's Full Interview. Okay, next, let's talk briefly about what a maxim is and why this topic was chosen with our group. The reason this topic is interesting is because in spontaneous conversation, like in a talk show, speaker often float conversational maxim, either internationally or uninternationally. Miscommunication can be avoided if both the speaker and the listener are aware of the context and interpreted the implied meaning behind what he said. The floating of maxims show us how important context is in the communication. This is actually the heart of Pragmatic, how meaning is created beyond the literal word. And usually, when someone float a maxim, they do it for a reason, maybe to be funny or to express feeling or just to tell a story. Okay, and for this to work, both sides need to share the same understanding of the context. So basically, floating maxim is not always a mistake. Sometimes it's part of how we connect with each other in the conversation.
Okay, the next is object research. The object of the research is the utterance of participants in a talk show, specifically in Ellen Show, episode featuring Will Smith, Mena Massoud, and Naomi Scott. The Will Smith full interview on episode from May 25, 2019. And then the study examines how and why the conversational maxims are floated in this real life unscripted talk show in setting, using both the video and transcript as data source. And then the analysis focus on the reasons behind the floating of maxims and how this instance can be interpreted within the context of the situations, drawing on Halliday and Hassan's theory of context that is field, tenor, and mode.
Okay, hi, my name is Alifia Putri, and I will explain about methodology and conclusion. Okay, let's move to methodology. The data source in this study was a video taken from the Ellen Talk Show on the episode Will Smith's Full Interview on May 25, 2019. It was a video talk show between Ellen DeGeneres and Aladdin movie cats. They are Will Smith, Mena Massoud, and Naomi Scott. This talk show was chosen as it is very popular, which is one of the most famous American talk show that is hosted by Ellen DeGeneres. The episode has been watched by almost 6 million people and consists of various topics of talk which indicate the implementation of the cooperative principle and the conversational maxim that provide various types of floating maxim for the analysis.
Now, let me explain this theory used in this research. The main theory is cooperative principle by Grace. According Greece, in order to have an effective conversations, people need to cooperate by following four conversations maxims. The first is maxim quantity, which means we should give enough information, not too little and not too much. The second is maxim of quality, which is about telling the truth, don't lie or give information without the proof. And the third is maxim relations, which tell us to stay relevant and not go off topic. And finally, the maxim of manner, which means we should speak clearly, briefly, and avoid confusions. However, sometimes people break the rules and call flouting the maxims. For example, someone not give too much detail or say something sarcastic. They're not trying to devise but to imply something indirectly. To help understand what people really mean when they floating maxims, this study also used Halliday's and Hassan's context of situations theory. This theory looks are in three things. The first is topic conversational. It's called field. The second is relationship between the speaker. It's called tenor. And the last is the form of communications like face-to-face or written. It's called mode. And this helps us interpret hidden meaning and understand what's really going on these conversations, especially in talk show, where speech is spontaneous and playful.
Hi everyone, I'm Jikri Apriyadi and my turn is about the result or the finding floating maxim in this talk show. Okay, the first in this slide I will explain about the floating of maxim quality. As you know, maxim quality is about the truth, not fake. Okay, and this slide I will explain. Ellen's response is an example of floating the maxim of quality. Why? Because she says something that is not true. Then Will Smith knows it's not true. Ellen does this to joke around Will Smith and make the conversation more lively. The next slide is about the floating of maximum quantity. As you know, maximum quantity is as much you give information, enough information, no more and no less. And in this case, or in this slide, uh, Will Smith response is an example of floating the maximum of quantity. Why? Because he provides additional information about the conversation he had with his wife, which is not necessary to answer the question. He does this because he wants to share the story of how his wife ended up jumping out of the plane for his birthday. And then the next slide is about the floating of maxim relation or relevance, as you know. Yeah, as you know, maxim relation is you have to relate between the topic and the answer. Have to relate. Yeah, and in this case, Will Smith's response is an example of floating the maxim of relation because he doesn't stay on the topic and provides an unrelated comment. He does this because he wants to give Ellen advice on not jumping out of a helicopter based on his own experience. In this slide is about the floating of maxim manner. As you know, this maxim is about your information or your answer have to be clear and not make the answer or information ambiguity. And in this case, Will Smith's response is an example of floating the maxim of manner. Why? Because he doesn't provide a clear and brief answer to the question. Instead, he shares his own experience of jumping out of the plane and what it feels like. He does this because he wants to share his experience and explain what it feels like to jump out of the plane. But he fails to make his point clear and brief.
And then conclusion, based on the previous analysis, this study focused on the analysis of floating maxims using the theory proposed by Herbert Paul Grace, 1975, with supporting theory of context of situation by Halliday and Hassan in talk show The Ellen Show, Will Smith episode. Conclusion is as follows. The analysis also shows that four sub-principles of Maxim are floated in the Ellen Show Will Smith episode: floating of Maxim relation and floating of Maxim manner, because there is a possibility of an utterance to apply one or more Maxim and at the same time it may float the other Maxim. Moreover, the most floated Maxim is the Maxim of quantity because the response or answer of the participants to the question given during the talk show. It delivers more information than it is required or asked by the other participant, even though those experiences based on their experience. Therefore, those phenomena make the maximum of quantity is floated in the conversation during the talk show.